I didn't become a victim of a false allegation when it happened to me. I became another recruit in the war against it.
My family and my name have been totally and permanently destroyed.
Is morphing into a witch hunt.
Always be presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty.
Welcome to Salem's Ghost. I'm John Victor Ramses. In the last Salem's Ghost video, number 2, I read a letter I had written in February 2015 to then Australian Foreign Minister Julie Bishop, while still incarcerated in Acacia Prison, West Australia, with regard to the abusive treatment I had endured by the legal and judicial system in her home state of Western Australia. That letter, which was just one of many I had written and mailed to politicians and organizations during my 6.5 years in prison, best described what I, as a U.S. citizen, a man and father, had been subjected to in Western Australia in 2010, leading to a wrongful conviction and unlawful imprisonment. In that letter, which is posted on my website at salemsghost.com, I touched on the hardships of attempting to prepare for my own trial, unrepresented, and with zero legal knowledge or support whatsoever. But the term hardship grossly underdefines what I actually endured. In effect, it was impossible to self-represent in such a case, with a conviction guaranteed for the state, as they had intended. And the presiding judge, a British corporate judge, who had only been in Australia for about a year by then, had been wholly aware of that fact. But when you are charged in a country that effectively recognizes no rights for any human being, they can do what they want with you. And apparently, the U.S. neither had the power to intervene for one of its own citizens on behalf of fairness, or they equally just don't care. My trial was in no lawful form a fair trial. It was an inquisition, with guilt already predetermined and conviction intended before the trial ever began. The purpose of putting me to trial at all had nothing to do with any alleged crime. They knew I was innocent. They had seen the proof, as I had directed them to, but withheld it from me and from trial deliberately to ensure a conviction. In fact, there never should have been a trial at all, a costly trial to the Australian taxpayers, and myself, and to my family. The reason they had pursued to trial with determination to convict me was purely to keep me, a father, isolated from my precious daughter. During an era when the war against men, fathers, and families had begun in earnest in Australia, they knew the allegations were false. The real reason they put me to trial was to contain me. I had made it abundantly clear at the time of my arrest and thereafter, both verbally and in writing on my website, AmericanDownUnder.com, that I wanted my daughter back, and her mother charged with reporting false allegations and fabricating evidence. At the time, I had been so shocked and so angered that my former Australian family could do such an evil thing to me and my precious daughter, who loved her daddy, after our otherwise close, wonderful 11 years together, that I was determined to fight back and not let them get away with such a sinister, cruel deed. Moreover, I was never going to allow my daughter to go through life believing her daddy was a criminal, much less a sex offender. And I let them know about it on my website. On the front page of that American Down Under site, I had written a message to them. To those I once loved and called my Australian family, you took my name, my career, my money, my friends, my dignity, my passport, and my future. You left me, my mother's only son, for dead in a maximum security prison in a foreign country. Some of you lied and made false statements against me, while the rest are complacent. You eagerly await your compensation money from the blood and ruin of my life. Your legal system prevented me from proper legal representation, with the allegations made conveniently after a divorce. This after all I had done for you and Australia over the past 11 years. But your mistake was taking my daughter. Now that statement was almost the sole reason why I was put to trial with intent to convict, rather than have my case dismissed on the basis of available evidence that proved the allegations had been fabricated. Additional reasons were that I wrote messages and birthday letters to my daughter from my website in hope that she would find them, as well as posting the injustices I was being subjected to, while also calling out for U.S. media to please investigate the atrocious handling of my case. For this, they shut me down. In fact, I had been arrested for publishing it, and subsequently threatened by the arresting officer with further charges if I didn't close down my website. But I refused to close it. I wasn't a citizen of Australia, nor by then even a welcome guest, but now just a foreigner far from home. That made me extremely vulnerable to their advantage, which they liberally abused, knowing I was helpless. I had refused to leave Australia and my daughter behind, simply because I had become divorced. I loved them both, Australia and my daughter. My life and investment was in Australia. My wife had believed that I would only be deported after she had made allegations to police, but as I explained in a previous video, once a sexual allegation is reported to the police, it becomes the jurisdiction of the state, and no longer the jurisdiction of the reporter. And only the state can decide to pursue it or not. After posting the messages, both my former Australian family and the state knew I would do whatever it took to find my daughter Amy, and pursue charges against my ex-wife for making false allegations that effectively destroyed my name and career and my life overnight. They knew I would go public, which would also then undermine their agenda. What they failed to understand about me is that I was an old-school American father who not only loved my children more than my own life, but that I would fight to the death to keep them and protect them. They knew nothing about me, nor about old-school American parents with regard to our values and ideals and our love for our children. It is they who watch too much Homer Simpson or Family Guy and believe it to be as fact about us. But quite the opposite is true with who we are in reality, for the most part. However, the Australian Authority would come to learn about Americans from me through the prison years, which only forced them to tighten their suppression of my voice. As stated in previous videos, I was no ordinary prisoner. But what I would come to learn from them, on the other hand, is that they despise our American Constitution and the very fact that I was a man and a father. Their campaigns against men and fathers had been discreetly launched in around 2009-2010 with the coup against Kevin Rudd and the rise of Julia Gillard to power under Hillary Clinton's watch, if not direct influence. Indeed, being a man and father, and having come from a close traditional family background with traditional American values, was the actual crime of which I was convicted of in Australia, and not because of a bogus, clearly false allegation made by a misguided, disgruntled wife. 10 years ago began the outward assault on men and families in Australia, which only recently has begun in earnest in America this past 2 years, with strong resistance against it, I might add. Men and fathers in Australia were being erased from visible society, silenced, however discreetly at first. The purpose is, of course, to destroy the family. that would in turn create a new generation of empty, mindless, confused, government-controlled socialist shells out of our children, whom they can then use at their disposal. Disposal being the key word there. I had written of this as far back as 2010 and 2011. And that agenda has since been proven today by the radical left's own words and actions worldwide. However, I digress. The primary purpose of this video, number 3 in the series, is to share with Americans in particular what it was like for me as an accused American in Australia to have to stand trial utterly alone with no counsel and completely lacking of any legal knowledge whatsoever in a foreign court that had already planned to convict me, but was just going through the motions of fairness to the accused. Keep in mind, if you would, that I had made it abundantly clear from the onset of the arrest 1 year prior to trial, and throughout the hearings leading to trial, that I wanted legal representation, which I believed was my right, according to international treaty via the ICCPR at least. And I had routinely pleaded to the U.S. consulate in Perth for help in getting said representation, to no avail. Until at last, just 2 or so weeks away from trial, I was begrudgingly forced to tell the judge of that foreign court that I intended to act as my own counsel. They were putting me to trial, regardless of counsel or not. I would also like you to imagine the panic and fear and heartache of loneliness I experienced as the trial crept closer and closer, terrified that I would be going to a foreign prison far from home. Imagine, if you would, also how confusing and literally impossible it had been for me to attempt to prepare alone for a trial with zero legal knowledge, saying nothing of the sleepless nights and troubled days, all contributing to adverse effects on my mental and physical health. The circumstance created anxiety, fatigue, and the return of angina stemming from a previous heart attack that I had not felt since July 1, 1999. And through it all, I was so terribly missing my little daughter. In fact, throughout the trial, I wore a hummingbird necklace that my daughter had given me some time before, as a reminder to me that this was my daughter I was fighting for. It had always been a fight for my daughter. Moreover, I was also forced to stand trial in bare feet in their dirty court, which humiliated and degraded me before the jury, my ex-wife, and her family, robbing me even further of dignity, as well as causing distraction. I had spent over $500 on new clothes for trial in order to show respect for the court. All I had for footwear were my Western-style cowboy boots, which were taken from me because they were deemed to be dangerous weapons due to the pointed toe of their design. So barefoot, I stood in trial for 5 grueling days in their court. They also tried to take the hummingbird necklace from me that I wore inside my dress shirt close to my heart. But that wasn't going to happen. Now, if you will, I'd like to read segments of my trial transcript with brief comments that should demonstrate for any rational person the terrible unjust conditions of which I was subject to. The trial took place in the District Court of Western Australia, located in the heart of Perth CBD, between 8 August and 12 August 2011. The first day of trial, being 8 August, had been spent going through the motion of jury selection, listening to the judge explain the so-called rules, pleading to charges, etc., and bringing up the first witness, my stepdaughter, who had alleged the accusations against me under her mother's influence. But for cross-examination, I was not permitted to address the complainant directly. Instead, the judge, in a previous hearing, had ordered me to pre-write a list of questions I might have for the complainant 1 week before trial, which she then had to approve of. This without ever knowing what would actually be said during trial, but you can sure bet the prosecutor read that list and then coached the complainant accordingly. There is evidence to that effect. However, the list of questions that I did prepare could only then be read to the complainant by a court clerk in a linear 1, 2, 3 fashion. That method provided absolutely no way to rebuke an answer or question deeper into important matters, as was often required. The court clerk would simply read the question, and the complainant would answer yes, no, or I can't remember, and then move on to the next question. It was not, by any definition of the term, a cross-examination. It was insanity. But they had already planned to convict me, so the trial was effectively a dog and pony show for the public and jury. On the following day, the judge allowed me a short period of time to contemplate the answers given from the previous day and to write additional questions for the complainant, which again the judge would have to approve of. I was in no mental frame of mind to even remember what had been said by then. All the vital evidence I had sought to expose for the jury through a natural, lawful cross-examination was, of course, never exposed to the jury. Under immense duress and fatigue from sleepless nights, I struggled desperately to understand the rules of trial proceedings. Throughout that trial, the judge had to repeat the rules over and over, which embarrassed me and caused distraction for the jury. The judge grew more and more impatient with me, causing further embarrassment, which only added to my anxiety. I'll read you now an example of the exchange from the actual trial transcripts. August 9, 2011, Day 2 of the trial. Me. Your Honor, do I only get one question to ask her? Judge. Well, or a series of questions, because it appears it's a different line of questioning, Mr. Ramses, than the ones that were discussed yesterday. Me. I'm sorry, Your Honor. I seem to be at a loss here. I thought I could question her on a lot of things that she had in her statement. Is this my only chance to question her? The judge. Mr. Ramses, I'll say it again. At that point, the judge begins to re-explain the rules to me, which I simply couldn't get my head around. Some minutes later, I continued, still not understanding. Me. And would I have the opportunity to question her on other matters later, separate of this? The judge. No, I have said this already, she chastised. Me. It would be much different if I were actually posing the questions to the complainant in person. In other words, rather than writing my questions and then handing them to a court clerk to read. The judge then asked me if I had any more questions before the trial resumed. I do have one question, I began. Actually, I have 6 for you before we begin. But in this particular matter, am I able to address each issue or question as it comes up? Or, I guess what I'm saying is, when I'm interviewing her, if there comes a point where I need to submit evidence or tell the whole story, would that be an appropriate time to do it? At the end of each statement? Or should I wait for the end of trial? The judge interrupts and says, perhaps I should explain again. The judge explained again to me the rules of evidence and proceedings, and then asked me, do you follow that, Mr. Ramses? To which I replied, yes, I'm just learning through this, but I'm catching on. This was in no way a classroom situation in which to be learning to become a criminal defense lawyer. On the 3rd day of the trial, I was attempting to understand the rules and procedures and terminologies under emotional duress, fatigue, and anxieties. Bouts of angina made it difficult to breathe and speak coherently. Throughout that trial, the judge had to coach or correct me on what to do, which I simply did not understand. I was not a lawyer. By the third day, the damage to my case was well and truly done, and I never had the opportunity to address nor properly exhibit my evidence. What average person could defend themselves in such a situation, much less in a foreign country and foreign court, with absolutely no support or advice? By the afternoon of the third day, my ex-wife had been brought up to testify. In this matter, I was allowed to personally cross-examine her, such as it was. I was already shattered by then, but the defamation and lies she spewed about me to the court further destroyed me. In spite of the divorce, I still had deep feelings for her. In fact, I still loved her. It hadn't been me who wanted the divorce, and I still couldn't grasp that we had divorced at all. I could only ramble, trying to remind her of our time together. Then, I finally suffered a mental and emotional breakdown before the court, and could not complete the vital cross-examination, leaving many facts, in my case, unaddressed. It had all become too much for me, and the transcripts record. And 10 years came to pass, and it was over in 2009. "You set me up, bitch," I yelled at my ex-wife. I then began shaking and crying. The judge intervened. "Mr. Ramses, you may not—" Me interrupting the judge, crying, "You set me up." Then, through broken breaths, I addressed the judge. "Your Honor, I don't know if I can do this." The judge, "You may not abuse the witness." Me, "I don't want to. I'm innocent. I've got the evidence to prove it, but I don't know how to fucking show it." The judge, "Mr. Ramses, please compose yourself." Me, sobbing, "I haven't slept for 2 goddamn weeks and she doesn't care. She's got my daughter." I then threw my haphazard stack of documents across the table in the midst of my emotional breakdown. The judge addressed the jury. "Members of the jury will take a short break. If you would please retire for a moment." I continued talking, deliriously. "She put me in prison," I said, "and took my daughter. Then I yelled out, 'You bastards! I want her back.' Then to the judge I said, 'God, I can't defend myself, Your Honor. Not against this. This was my family. And I haven't slept for weeks preparing for this. And Your Honor, I don't know what to do now. Everything's been said horrible about me, and it's not true.'" I had never called my wife such names before, but that breakdown played right into the hands of the prosecutor. In fact, I never should have been put in a situation of having to cross-examine my ex-wife, in the midst of a hard separation and custody battle, and terribly missing my daughter, whom she took from me through false allegations. I should have been given a lawyer. It was far too emotional to face the woman I still had deep feelings for and wonderful memories with. After the jury returned, while still shaking and trying to compose myself, I reiterated for the judge at various times as the trial continued, "I can't deal with this. Do you know how fucking hard this is? I haven't slept in a week, and I'm sorry. I know it was all in order, my documents and evidence. I don't know where to go now. This is where I should have dumped it all on the internet. My God, at least someone would see it. I'm innocent. I don't know what to do, Your Honor. I'm not an attorney, and I'm 10,000 miles away from my home and family, and I don't see my daughter, Amy." Then, pointing to the jury, I accused, "And these people don't care about my life. I'm sorry for holding up the trial, Your Honor." I never should have felt compelled to apologize for holding up their trial, where my life was on the line. my life. I was 51 years old, and by then, not well, due to the duress and the stress and the heartache I had endured up to that point. But it was in the aftermath of that emotional breakdown, in the afternoon of the third day of trial, that I realized I was reliving the insanity of 1692 Salem. And in that moment, I felt what each and every one of those Salem victims had felt: the sheer terror, the helplessness, the despair, loneliness, and abandonment. Salem's ghost had returned once again. My trial was not a trial by any stretch of the term. It was an inquisition with guilt already predetermined. Naturally, I was inept to the bitter end, as the trial transcript clearly demonstrates, even to the closing address, which I began like this. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm not an eloquent speaker like Mr. Nickel, the prosecutor. And it's true, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a good speaker, as you can tell. But that doesn't mean I'm guilty of anything. I did a search on the internet last night for what a closing address was, and it blew me away. There was no way I could do that. I haven't got the training. I stayed up all night trying to figure out how to write this closing address. I was reading websites. What the fuck is a closing address? I had to learn about trials every step of the way, learning what these guys, the prosecutors, spend years in college to learn before ever walking into a courtroom. Look at him. He's great. He's eloquent. But he's in this to win, not find the truth. Still further demonstrating my lack of understanding of trial matters or closing addresses, I began rambling again, telling the jury of things related to my case, important facts, which I never had a fair opportunity nor the skill to reveal during trial. Apparently, this is not allowed. The prosecutor interrupted me. Your Honor, I'm sorry to interrupt, but he's introducing evidence in a closing address. Then the judge chastised me. Mr. Ramses, you've already had your opportunity to give evidence from the witness box. You don't give evidence when you're standing at a bar table making submissions in an argument. What was a bar table? I had wondered. The term conjured images of furniture one might find at a local pub. Moreover, being in the midst of a criminal trial was no place for me, the defendant, at age 51, to be learning through this, but catching on. My life was on the line. For 5 days the trial judge had heard from me. I don't know what to do. I'm not a lawyer. I can't defend myself, Your Honor. I have the evidence but don't know how to show it. Do you know how fucking hard this is? I just don't know where to go now. And, God, I can't defend myself, Your Honor. Not against this. This was my family. For 5 days, the judge observed my struggle to comprehend their outrageous rules, me often speaking incoherently, while I fought emotions, fatigue, heartache, and suffering from angina, all alone. The judge observed my emotional breakdown with seeming indifference. But indifference had been the reaction from all those involved since the onset, from the U.S. consulate and ambassador, to lawyers, to legal aid, to the legal and judicial system itself. The judge knew I did not want to face trial without representation. I had stated it in hearing after hearing. The U.S. consulate and ambassador certainly knew. But I never should have been put on trial in the first place. They knew I was innocent. I was set up for what I had said on my website, period. But even in the event of a trial, A presiding judge has a duty to assess the circumstances and conditions that might cause the trial to be manifestly unfair, leading to a miscarriage of justice. But this judge deliberately failed to act on those dangers. And despite of such unfair trial conditions, the judge then allowed the trial to conclude in a conviction. It was what they intended all along. I was sentenced to 6.5 years in their prison, the number of years until my precious daughter turned legal adult age. 7 years total, without her father in her life. But that, of course, was what it had all been about, keeping a good father isolated from his child. The story of my time in prison is, well, another story altogether. Much of it will be recounted in Salem's Ghost special segments, called the prison years, interwoven among the regular segments such as this one. I was finally released from Acacia Prison and deported to the United States on 31 December 2017, landing in my hometown of Salt Lake City on New Year's Day 2018, after nearly 20 years in the land down under. Yet upon my return home, I was to learn that the terrible injustices against a U.S. citizen that I had suffered and endured at the hands of the Australian government and judicial body would still continue, even in my home country, and most assuredly in violation of my constitutional rights. While in prison, I had suffered a near-fatal heart attack and subsequent aneurysm that caused a steady decline in my health, while adversely affecting my memory and balance and overall well-being. Prior to arrest, that is, prior to that horrible ordeal, I had been a strong, alert, healthy 50-year-old man and father. They did this to me just to keep a father from his daughter. The shock of being free again after years in isolation compounded those physical and mental problems. For a year afterwards, I struggled to reassimilate back into some semblance of life as I knew it. I had no mentoring or coaching in that matter. None was available. My beloved, now aging parents provided what they could, and I thank them dearly for it. Nonetheless, I was now facing homelessness in the dead of winter in my own hometown. My family had all been told by authorities not to let me come home. But then, a miracle occurred. In the midst of my despair, with only minutes away from homelessness and certain death from exposure to the cold, just shortly after I had arrived back home to Salt Lake City, there came for me what I can only define as God-sent angels, whose language I could barely understand, and who prepared for me a sanctuary in which to rest and cry and heal in safety and warmth, and who fed me and encouraged me. That experience left me with absolutely no doubt that there is some form of a benevolent God somewhere out there, and that some things are truly meant to happen, and that some of us, perhaps, must go through absolute hell and survive it in order to change the world for the better during periods when abject evil becomes the norm. If not for these angels, these good, decent, moral people who are from Mexico, Central America, and as far away as India, I would have died a homeless man in the freezing Utah January winter before that night was done. I would never have been able to share my story, and more important to me, my daughter would have never had the opportunity to find these videos of her father. Her father would have died, and she would have had to go through life believing in a sinister lie about me. One day, When the time is right, I must tell the story of these amazing, wonderful people who helped me, and most certainly the story of my arrival to what I call the Little Oz Motel. It will make you believe in God and the good in people again, I swear it. It has taken me over 1 year since being released to rebuild at least a makeshift version of my former Australia studio from the ghost radio days in order to produce these videos. And I had much welcomed help. My parents paid for much of it, allowing me little loans here and there, which I would pay back and then start again. That included a pair of GVM 560 studio lights, a camera, a newer laptop, and accessories. My boss purchased for me, as a gift, a much-needed Glide Gear TMP 100 teleprompter, which I am now using as I speak. The aneurysm caused faults in my memory and organization of my thoughts, which I still endeavor to overcome. And perhaps worse yet, this past December 30, 2018, around 3 a.m., I suffered a stroke that left me unable to speak and had compromised the use of my right arm and hand for some time. I was terrified that I wouldn't be able to make the videos for my daughter. I wouldn't accept that my voice and my story would now never be heard after all I'd been through. I forced myself to recover from it, and I have now to a large degree. As a result of the aneurysm I suffered while in prison, I still can't remember one sentence from another without reading it, and the teleprompter has been a necessary tool in creating these videos, where otherwise I would be constantly looking away, reading from a sheet of paper, with hundreds of jerky edit cuts in the final video. I have come to truly believe, after all I've been through, and am still going through, and all the miracles that I have witnessed and the good people that I have encountered since release, that all of this was meant to happen, orchestrated perhaps from something out there. And I'm not a religious person. Clearly, humanity is in trouble. There is no doubt in my mind that it is as much a spiritual war as it is likely to become a physical war. And I've seen the ugliness in human beings, and they weren't all in prison, but instead right in front of us, on our TV, in our courts, corporations, our Senate and parliaments, our schools and universities, and in our neighborhoods. And sometimes they manifest in the person or people you loved and trusted the most. But we need to fight it, and we need to fight it hard. The alternative is unspeakable. I would be interested in knowing whether you, the viewer, believe that the trial I was subjected to in Western Australia, under the conditions of that trial, was, in your opinion, fair and just. I suppose I'm curious to see just how far Western societies have fallen in this new era of weaponized accusations. All the way back to 1692, perhaps. Or are there still enough good, moral, decent people remaining to offer significant hope for our troubled future? I pray so, for our children and grandchildren's sake, where 1692 will become the norm for the next 400 years. I am John Victor Ramses. I didn't become a victim of a false allegation when it happened to me. I became another recruit in the war against it. Please share, comment, like, or dislike, but by all means subscribe, especially if you are an American or Australian. There's a lot more coming that you might need to know about. And I'm searching for my daughter still, who never knew the truth of what happened to her daddy. If you know my daughter, tell her I love her, and that I never left her. Her daddy was taken. Thanks for watching Salem's Ghost.
My family and my name have been totally and permanently destroyed.
Is morphing into a witch hunt.